Hello, everyone. Welcome to the GPP Chin Music Premium Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42, joined by Scott Mailwig at Sports25 to Life on Twitter, and we're going to give you the breakdown game by game for games from both slates here. Some GPP targets, some stacks, some situations to exploit, avoid, etc., and a lot of stuff on tap. So you ready to get going here, man?
Yeah, definitely. Should be a fun slate.
All right, now we're talking FanDuel and DraftKings here. So we're going to take things from the top with the first game. First one's going to be Toronto at Baltimore. And this one is the first game, obviously, locks. Like I mentioned, there's 5 games early and 10 games late. So this one's going to be the first game, 305 lock if you're playing all day or early only slate. And this one has an 8-run total. Pretty close to a pick'em here. Mark Burley against Bud Norris. Mark Burley with that pedestrian strikeout rate. A fairly efficient pitcher still, but not a guy that I'm targeting at all. Are you looking at either of these pitchers for your GPPs today?
Not really. I think even calling Burley's strikeout rate pedestrian is a little aggressive there.
Yeah, I think it was under 14% last year.
Yeah, he was at like 13.8 or 13.9 last year. It was just so low. I mean, not even that's low for his career. He's been pretty low his entire career, but I mean, that's low.
Yeah.
So, yeah, with the 8 over-under, the pick'em line, I really like some of the hitters in this game. I don't feel great about either of the pitchers. If I was picking one, I'd probably take Norris, but like his strikeout rate is right at the 20% that's like league average. So I don't feel great about him for GPPs. I'd rather look at the hitters in this game and avoid the pitchers.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And obviously some big-time bats here in this one. You've got Toronto matched up against Bud Norris. You've got guys like Edwin Encarnacion with some big-time power. Hit himself a homer yesterday. He's sitting at $5,000 on DraftKings, and on FanDuel he's at $4,600. So I think he and Joey Bats are going to be my biggest targets in this one, obviously with the biggest upside of any of the guys here.
Yeah, the other guy I like on Toronto is Jose Reyes. I think he's got some nice stolen base potential in this one. He's hitting left-handers pretty well. Last season, I think he had a 330 WOBA against them. I think that's pretty solid. I like the stolen base potential here with Burley on the mound. His pickoff is pretty good still. It's a little concerning there. I'm not overly worried about that. I think he probably picks up his stolen base later in the game, if anything, because you know Burley's probably not going 7-8 in this one in his first start of the season. So I like Reyes hitting against Burley and then hopefully picking up stolen base later in the game.
Yeah, and I like that. I mean, he's only $3,700 on FanDuel, so a nice discount compared to the $47 at DraftKings. So a solid play there. On the Baltimore side of the ball here, I'm not going out of my way to target Mark Burley, but I will be targeting with Adam Jones, who has an insane amount of power against lefties. If you've been playing MLB DFS, if you even watch it, you have to know he's got one of the best ISOs against left-handed pitching in the game. And you can get him for $4,100 on FanDuel today, which is a fair price, and then $4,900 on DraftKings. And you'll kind of notice a trend here. DraftKings pricing really stiffened up today. There's some pretty pricey guys on both slates here.
Yeah, it seems like they really upped everybody in the good hitters ballparks and the high over-unders here, even this one. The other guy I like for Baltimore is Steve Pearce against lefties. He just has great numbers against them. I think he was over 400 WOBA against them last year. 4,100 on FanDuel, 4,300 on DraftKings. Both solid prices. I feel pretty good about him too. I don't think I'm going to be targeting him or Adam Jones really heavily. Burley's not a big home run guy, but I don't have any issue with either one of them in GPPs.
No, not at all. And like we said, lots of upside, lots of power with these guys against lefties, so that's what you're looking for. That's the name of the game in GPPs, is you want the guys that can pay out their salary and then some with one swing of the bat. So next up, Houston at Texas. This one starting off at 4:05. I kind of wish we had that extra hour and they just kind of get rid of the first game off the slate. But either way, an 8-run total here, real close to a pick'em once again. Colin McHugh against Derek Holland. And I have a soft spot for Colin McHugh. I love Colin McHugh, one of my favorite young pitchers in the game. And yes, it's a higher total, but that Texas lineup outside of Prince Fielder, Adrian Beltre, the obvious guys, there's really not a lot to be concerned about. I know they blew up yesterday, but I think that was more of an anomaly than anything against a young pitcher, a rookie pitcher making his first start even. So I don't mind targeting Colin McHugh, and I'm not going to be playing cash games really with the early slate with not a lot of good options at pitcher, but if there's one pitcher I don't mind paying for, it's going to be McHugh.
Yeah, he's a great early GPP play. Like you said, there's not a lot of pitching options on this early slate. In this group of games, there's a lot of high over-unders here. The strikeout rate's great for GPPs. I think he was over 25% last year. That's solid. Um, I mean, the Rangers lineup's pretty solid, but I mean, you have to take some pitcher on this early slate, and that's the tough part here. And I think he's a great one for GPPs. If he gets it going, I think he can have a really nice game here.
Yeah, and he's only $7,000 on DraftKings too, which is really nice. 81 on FanDuel, obviously a little more pricey, but I mean, absolutely in play there against Texas. And if you're looking at bats in this one, you've got some guys with some huge upside. We know Chris Carter, Evan Gattis, both those guys pretty much power or bust, especially Chris Carter, but had some double-dong games last year. I think he hit 36 home runs, so the guy's got a ton of power, or 37 home runs, a ton of power. You play him at first base or outfield on DraftKings. Gattis is catcher or outfield on DraftKings. So those would be my main targets in this one. But outside of that, I mean, on the Texas side, there's just not a ton that I'm going into because I do think Colin McHugh will be the one pitcher I have a decent amount of on the early slate.
Yeah, as far as Houston goes, I mean, I don't mind Springer in this game either. He's been pretty hot to start the season. He was pretty good against lefties last year. Jose Altuve is a guy that doesn't have a lot of power, but I think he was over 440 against lefties last year, WOBA-wise. That's pretty solid for him. I really like that. The only guy I'm really looking at on Texas, I looked at Shin-Soo Choo a little bit. His FanDuel price is $2,900. That's the main reason I was looking at him. He's way above that on DraftKings. I think he's over $4,000 on DraftKings. But $2,900 on FanDuel has him right in the GPP conversation for me.
Yeah, that's a tremendous price for him. I mean, he had a 3-run homer yesterday, had a nice game. If you were one of the 3 people on Earth that stacked to Texas yesterday, which I feel like I whiffed on that one. That's one that should have been obvious. You want to target on some rookie pitchers in their first start, but either way, Kendall Graveman was supposed to have. He was one of the bigger favorite on the board, so you kind of didn't figure that was going to happen.
Yeah.
But either way, I mean, I think that Altuve's fine. Like you said, he was one of the better hitters in the game against lefties last year. Not a lot of power, but that stolen base upside, and especially on DraftKings, 5 points for a stolen base. I mean, big time upside there, even without the power.
Yeah.
Next up, Detroit at Cleveland here. And this one's starting off at 410. We've got a Alfredo Simon making his Detroit debut against Zach McAllister. Zach McAllister, a small favorite. And I will say this, if you're playing GPPs, you need cheap pitchers because there really aren't that many good ones. And if you look over on DraftKings, Zach McAllister is sitting at $4,200. And not a great pitcher by any means. Average strikeout rate, pretty much average across the board. But, I mean, at $4,200, you're going to have to take a chance somewhere. And he is a small favorite at home. Yes, a very tough matchup, but $4,200. I think I'm just going to go ahead and slot him into most of my GPP lineups and just hope and pray at that price.
Yeah, he's not a bad price on FanDuel either. I think he's only like 56 or 57 there. Yeah, 57 it looks like. I mean, that's not a bad price either. Like you said, it's a tough matchup, but we got to take somebody on this early slate. I think he's okay. I'm not super excited about him. That $4,200 price on DraftKings is really hard to ignore, though, when you can just stack up on some of these big hitters we've been mentioning. So, I mean, that's a great GPP play there.
Absolutely. And as far as hitters in this one, I'm really not going out of my way to target a lot of hitters. I mean, Simon, not a great pitcher, not dominant by any means, is a contact pitcher. He's going to give up some contact, but doesn't give up a ton of home runs. Or he struggled at the end of last season with it a little bit, but I'm really not going out of my way to target this one, especially with the next 2 games coming up that you're going to want a ton of exposure to.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's really no one in this game that like really stands out. There's a lot of like really decent plays, but no one that I feel like has a ton of upside for GPPs that just like really stands out. Obviously, Cabrera always has upside. I mean, it's just standard stuff with these guys. There's nothing really special about the matchups here.
Yeah, agree. And if I'm going to be paying up for some hitters today, it's not going to be Miguel Cabrera. It's going to be guys from mostly the last game of the early slate, but also Minnesota at the White Sox. Got an 8.5 run over-under here. Tommy Malone versus Hector Noesi, 2 of the worst pitchers on the board, early or late slate today. You know, hence the big total. So some fireworks expected here. You got your obvious names. Your Jose Abreu, he's $5,500 on DraftKings, $4,500 on FanDuel. Nice price for him with ridiculous upside. You're not going to be able to get much of a White Sox stack if Adam LaRoche is in the lineup as well, because you're going to have first base across the board,
right,
which makes that tough. Brian Dozier's price really jacked up in a matchup that he was really good in last year. Second base and shortstop eligible at DraftKings, but at $5,200, he's pretty pricey. So outside of the obvious, I mean, you're going to want some exposure here. You're going to want to see some guys where they're slotted in the lineup. Maybe Melky Cabrera, nice speed and power combo there. Who else do you like in this one?
For Minnesota, Kenny Vargas is 2,500 on FanDuel. He was fantastic against right-handers last year. I think he had a 380 WOBA. I mean, he doesn't have as much power as I'd really like, but I think he's pretty solid here. I just really like that FanDuel price at 2,500. I think you can really use that extra salary to get some nice stuff going. And like you said, this game's a really high over-under. Melky was the guy for the White Sox that I was looking at. That's probably the only guy I feel like really strongly about because he has a really nice price on FanDuel too, 2,900. Obviously, Abreu's the top play in their lineup. You can fit him. Great play.
Absolutely. And, yeah, I'm with you on Kenny Vargas. I mean, he had himself a couple nice games, cheap last year. He's going to be a sneaky under-the-radar play. And then second highest total on the early slate and second highest total overall for the day. So you're definitely going to want to get yourself some exposure there with some big bats. Next up comes the game that we'll just go ahead and tell you now. If you want to make money on the early slate, you stack this game however you can. You got a bad lefty against Colorado in Coors Fields. Everyone's going to be playing this game. If you want a chance to stay with some guys in GPPs and this one goes big, you're going to need a ton of exposure. And DraftKings knows that. Hence, Troy Tulowitzki going up to $7,000 in his price today at shortstop, which seems absolutely ridiculous. But if you're going to stack this game and you don't put Troy Tulowitzki in, you lose. You have to play Troy Tulowitzki in your stacks here. He's $5,100 on FanDuel, much easier to afford. But obviously, if you're stacking more than 4 players, you've got to do it on DraftKings, and Tulowitzki's a big part. So that's where Zach McAllister comes back into play because you're going to need that discount to stack the Rockies.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, like you said, it's really hard to stack this game without including him, and it just makes it really tough. Like, if you're leaving his spot out of the lineup, it's really hard to figure out what to do with that stack. And that price is just really, really expensive, which, like you said, puts McAllister right into play for giving you that much salary to work with. The play I really like in this game is stacking the Cubs, honestly, especially for GPPs. I really like Soler in this game, especially on FanDuel. He's only 3,700. It's a really, really strong play there. He hasn't had a great start to the season, but I think that'll be remedied a little bit today. Against lefties, I don't like Rizzo quite as much, but I feel pretty good about him still. Starlin Castro's a pretty solid play for me at shortstop if you're not going to Tulowitzki. He's 4,800 on DraftKings, so that's a nice discount. You can do a lot else. Pick up a better pitcher, although, like we've said, there aren't very many out there on this early slate. Just looking for a couple contrarian plays here as far as like going against this Tulowitzki play. Obviously, that's the recommended play here. I'm just looking around a little bit. Fowler he's a really solid price on FanDuel, 3,100, assuming he's out there today. Been great against lefties. So I feel pretty good about him in the outfield.
Yeah, I like that. And Tyler Matzik, to put things in perspective there, really good against lefties, but awful against righties. 372 WOBA allowed last year. Obviously, some of that due to pitching half his games in Coors Field, but definitely beatable with right-handed batters. So I like that contrarian Cubs stack call because this does have a 10-run total. There's going to be runs scored. And one other guy I want to mention here, kind of pricey on DraftKings, but you're going to need him in a stack. He's at 5,100, 35 on FanDuel is a great price for him, assuming he's in the lineup. And if Walt Weiss wants to win this game, then Willen Rosario had better be in this lineup. We've seen him before. I mean, he's got astronomical, like video game numbers against lefties. Last year, 327 ISO, 422 WOBA against lefties. Just absolutely crushes southpaws. So I will love to be playing him at FanDuel, especially at catcher, and probably all of my lineups in the early slate, assuming that he's batting.
Yeah, that's the guy that if he's in the lineup, even if you're not stacking the Rockies, you pretty much have to take him, I feel like. You pretty much just have to lock him in.
Yeah, I mean, he's the cheaper must-play behind Tulo when you can. And, I mean, obviously, you might not be able to fit Tulo, but like I said, Rosario will be my catcher in all my lineups if he's in that order today.
Yeah, mine too, most likely.
All right, moving on here to the late slate now. First game we've got Boston at New York. And this one, I mean, we got 10 games on the slate tonight. So this one I don't love a lot of hitters in because, you know, you've got okay pitchers, Wade Miley, struggles against lefties and righties, but does keep the ball on the ground, which is good. And Yankee ballpark, obviously I'm not playing him no matter what. I'm not a big Wade Miley fan. Nathan Eovaldi is a guy who is an average at best. So, I mean, two guys you don't necessarily want to go out of your way to pick on, but neither one in play for me in tournaments either.
Yeah, I mean their prices are okay. You're right. It's just like they're right in that middle ground where like you're not excited about them price wise, you're not excited about them upside wise. I'm just not feeling great about either of them today.
Yeah, and in all reality, on a 10-game slate, I'm really not going to be stacking a lot of batters from this one either. There's a couple guys on my radar, though. Of course, you've got David Ortiz at $3,700 on FanDuel, assuming he's in the lineup, and he should be. Tremendous price there for a guy with double-dong upside in that's short porch and right field especially.
Yeah, definitely. I like Pedroia also in this game too, especially for GPPs. I think he's got a ton of upside. He finally cooled off after that really hot start, but at second base, there's not a lot I love at second base today. I want to take the upside there as often as I can, especially with the power. That's going to be the guy I'm looking at, mostly from Boston. There's not a whole lot else I like in this game hitting-wise, though.
Yeah, a lot of the Yankees bats kind of jacked up in price, and not guys I'm going to force in my lineup on this slate.
Right.
But yeah, I do like the Pedroia call because, like you'll see, not a lot of great second baseman options, not even a lot of good second baseman options on the late slate here. So go ahead and slotting in Pedroia is definitely not a bad way to go at all. Now here we come to the biggest favorite on the night, Gio Gonzalez, a -150 against Philly, and the beast that is Jerome Williams, who should get knocked around quite a bit today. Arguably the worst pitcher on the board, pretty bad pitcher. I guess it's subjective, but I am not going to be avoiding him at all. I think Gio Gonzalez, he's a fine player for your GPPs, but he's going to be a popular picker. I can't talk now. A popular pick at pitcher because he is a big favorite. He's got nice upside, and it's a good matchup against an aging Phillies lineup. So I'm not saying don't play him in your GPPs, but he should be the most popular play, though.
Yeah, right. And if you're trying to win a GPP, especially if you're stacking some of these more like highly owned teams, you're probably going to have to go a little bit more contrarian at pitcher. That said, I don't really like anyone on Philly because of him. I'm pretty much avoiding their entire offense today for the most part, and I'm going to go after this Washington lineup a little bit. I like Harper again. Feel pretty good about Zimmerman too. Is there anyone a little bit more under the radar that you're looking at on Washington?
I mean, nobody that I mean, obviously Harper's your top play. Ryan Zimmerman, you know, he's a fine guy. He's got some power. But, I mean, I like him more as a cash game play. He's a guy that gets on base more. Doesn't show a lot of power. Already hit a homer this year. But, I mean, I don't mind a Washington stack at all, in which case you're going to need to get all these guys. But really, like you said, I mean, Harper's the guy who jumps off the page to you. Everyone else is kind of going to just depend on lineup positioning and things of that nature because no one else just jumps off at me.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. Like you said, Harper jumps off the page. Zimmerman feels like more of a cash game play, especially at his DraftKings price right now. I think he's the same price as Harper, and I just don't feel great about that upside-wise. And then everybody else is kind of iffy to me unless I'm actually stacking the team.
Yeah, I completely agree there. So this is going to be an easy one to not necessarily avoid, but pick and choose your spots with. Next up, St. Louis at Cincinnati. St. Louis, a sizable favorite in this one, I guess you could say, compared to the rest of the games on the slate. John Lackey, -135 favorite against Jason Marquis. Jason Marquis, not in the majors last year, making his first start since 2013. So he looked good in spring, but obviously that was spring ball. Don't really know what to expect. And I'm not going to be too much of a homer of this one. Obviously, I'm a Reds fan, but I will say this. I don't mind taking some St. Louis bats. You've got your guys like Jason Hayward, hit righties really well. But as a team, St. Louis was average, maybe not even quite average last year against righties. So, you know, you got a lot of guys in play. You've got your Matt Holliday, obviously, with your big upside. You've got guys like Matt Carpenter, who don't have a lot of power, but they're great on-base guys. Colton Wong with some power, but he bats low in the order. So I really think all the Cardinals' bats, really 1 through 6, are going to be in play for me here.
Yeah, there's a lot to like, not a lot to love. Carpenter's probably my favorite, but he's another guy that feels like a little bit more of a cash game play than a GPP play, especially at his price.
Yeah.
He's probably my favorite one, though. Obviously, Holiday's the upside GPP play here.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So this is another one of those ones where, like you said, you pinned it pretty perfectly. You know, a lot of guys to like, not a lot of guys to love. So 10 games on the late slate, 15 all day. No need to force guys in that you are not a big fan of. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to Tampa Bay at Miami. And one of my favorite pitchers to pick on, and I got a lot of flack for it last year, but it paid off quite nicely for me. Dan Herron. He's a small favorite here against Tampa Bay, -125. 7.5 run total, so Vegas thinks this one stays close. Steve Geltz on the other side, rookie pitcher there. I don't know a whole lot about him. Not a huge upside guy here, so not worried about taking some Miami bats against him. He's a right-handed pitcher, so Giancarlo Stanton obviously always in play. He mashes lefties more than righties, but he's still one of the better hitters in the game. But DraftKings making it tough to play him at $5,800. And you can get them much, much cheaper on FanDuel at $47, as you're still noticing this trend. FanDuel kind of behind a little bit on bumping these prices up, so that's where you're going to want to take advantage. But on the Tampa Bay side, Evan Longoria, my favorite option, absolutely here against Dan Herron, who struggled a lot last year and was a fine target for me. So who else do you like in this one?
I'm looking at Rene Rivera a little bit. I think he's hitting second again today. I feel decent about him. He's not a guy that's going to be like a huge upside guy, but anytime I can get a catcher hitting second in the top part of the order like that, I feel pretty good about it, especially at his pretty decent price.
Yeah, mid salary on FanDuel.
Yep. Yeah, I love him there. He's a little bit pricier on DraftKings, but everyone's a little bit pricier on DraftKings today. Yeah. So you got to make a concession somewhere. Otherwise, you're just going to end up playing only on FanDuel. So
yeah.
Let's see. The other guy I like in this game is D. Gordon. We talked about him a little bit before the show. He has some nice speed upside in this one. The price is a little high for me on DraftKings. I like him a little bit more on FanDuel, even though, like we were just talking about, got to like somebody. But I think he's a really strong play on FanDuel today. I think he's got a lot of speed upside.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the steals being so heavily weighted on DraftKings, 5 points for a steal. If he gets you 2 right there, all you really need, a walk, a single, 2 stolen bases, you got yourself 15 points on DraftKings.
Yep, exactly.
That's nice. And then scoring a couple runs you anticipate as well. So definitely like that call. Anybody else in this one? Are you ready to move on?
I think I'm ready to move on. You covered Longoria, talked about Stanton. I think we're all set.
All right, next up, the Mets at Atlanta. Just a 7-run total in this one, which is interesting to me. I think this is more telling about how bad the lineups are rather than how good the pitchers are.
Right.
John Neese, above average pitcher, not a great pitcher, not a big strikeout guy, but an effective pitcher. Eric Stoltz, not a good pitcher. Kind of got bailed out by pitching at Petco. I talked to Josh Shepardson about it on the other podcast. He's one of the worst starting pitchers, I think, and we both think, in the game. Now that he's in Atlanta, obviously not much of a pitcher's park anymore. Obviously a big downgrade for him. And, the Mets have some guys that can take advantage, but at the same time, it's still a pretty bad lineup. So the guys you're looking at, number one option, not even particularly close here, David Wright, $3,300 on FanDuel tonight, crushes lefties throughout his career. You have to get a ton of exposure to David Wright at that price on FanDuel today.
Yeah, I really like David Wright today. Probably my top third base play overall. GPPs, cash games, everything. Yeah. The problem is there's just not a lot else to like. Daniel Murphy's probably my other guy that I like in that lineup. And I don't even really feel strongly about him. I like Pedroia a little bit better for a little bit higher price. There's not a ton else at second base, though, like we mentioned when we were talking about Pedroia, and I can get on board with Daniel Murphy. Neese is probably one of my favorite GPP pitchers in this slate, though. Against Atlanta's pretty weak lineup. I feel pretty good about him. There's no one that really scares me in Atlanta's lineup whatsoever. I mean, Freeman is probably the most scary guy there, and outside of that, I just don't see anyone else that is going to like really scare me away from Neese and GPPs. He's got a pretty middling price. I think he's got some decent upside here in a really low run total.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, like we said, he's an above-average pitcher. He's effective, and there's not a lot of those. I mean, obviously, this is the first week, so all the good pitchers have already taken their first turn in the rotation. We're getting down to the bottom of the barrel guys, so you got to pick your spots, and I think that's a fine spot for him against an Atlanta team that struggles. And one more guy I'm going to add here is an upside guy, Wilmer Flores. He's $3,300 on second base and shortstop on DraftKings. Yep. Just $2,500 at shortstop on FanDuel. So a nice filler guy there. If you played last year, he was a guy who had some pop in his bat. Actually had one monster game late in the season last year. Really paid off for some people. So I'll have a couple shares of him as well.
Definitely.
All right, next up, Pittsburgh at Milwaukee. And this is obviously a more enticing game. This is one you're going to want some exposure to here in Miller Park, as we know. A nice hitter's park. And we got Jeff Locke here facing off against... wow, I lost it. I can't even
Mike Fears.
Mike Fears, yeah, of course. Mike Fears, Mr. Strikeout and Fly Ball, man.
Yep.
He got a huge strikeout rate at 27.7%. His fly ball rate, very concerning, though, at 49.9%, especially pitching at home there. So definitely a beatable pitcher with guys like Andrew McCutchen. And, I mean, Gregory Polanco's in play here. He's $3,500 on DraftKings. So those are my top 2 targets there. You've got obviously got Neil Walker as well, especially when he's batting lefty. He's great against righty. He's got a ton of power. And on the other side, you've got a ton of guys there as well. I mean,
yeah,
I guess I should mention Pedro Alvarez as well. The other side, Chris Davis, especially on FanDuel, one of my favorite plays on the late slate, or the all-day, I guess you could say. He's at $2,600, absolutely mashes left-handed pitching.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of guys in this game that, like, you could stack either lineup in this one, and I'd feel pretty good about it, honestly. I think I'd prefer going with Milwaukee, just because I think Braun's going to be out again today. Is that right?
I haven't heard like definitively, but I know they're
I haven't either. Yeah, it sounded like they were going to be really cautious, so that gives you a little bit cheaper of a stack. We might see Jeanette hit up a little bit higher in the lineup again. I like that stack quite a bit for GPPs. Honestly, I wouldn't mind putting Fears in that stack, like running the pitcher out there too and hoping he avoids some home runs here.
Yeah.
Like we said, you got to take some chances with the GPP pitchers here, especially when you're drafting 2 on DraftKings. 8,300 is a little pricey for me, but with the strikeout upside, I can get on board with it in GPPs, I think.
Yeah, and he has by far the highest strikeout rate, not only on the night slate, but on the entire day. I mean, you got Colin McHugh and Gio Gonzalez that are close, and really no one else even in the same ballpark. So
right, a lot of low strikeout pitchers today.
Yeah, I mean, even if he does give up a couple of long balls, if he gets you 10 Ks in 6 innings, he might be paying off his salary quite nicely with all these scrubs on the mound tonight. So.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, next up, speaking of scrubs, we've got Chase Anderson on the bump for Arizona at home at Chase Field. 8.5 run total here. Brett Anderson on the other side, and Brett Anderson, a guy who he's always been a ground ball pitcher, had a ridiculous rate last year in just over 40 innings, 61%. So he's a guy that keeps the ball on the ground. That's not necessarily going to scare me away from the Arizona bats, but I still really like the Dodgers bats against Chase Anderson here. I mean, you've got obviously Adrian Gonzalez is going to be a popular play, and this is the one spot where you've really got a difference. I mean, he's much more expensive on FanDuel, $5,300, than DraftKings at $4,700. That's the only time that's kind of flipped today. But going to be one of the most popular plays on the board, of course.
Yeah, I think so too, especially because, like you mentioned, he's one of the only guys that's priced, it feels like, a little bit lower than you would have expected based on the rest of these guys today. Let's see. There was someone else.
Puig.
Puig is a guy I liked in this game. There was one other guy that I marked down earlier, but now I can't remember who it was. Oh, I was going to look at Jimmy Rollins again today at shortstop for the late slate. I just don't love the upside with him, though, right now.
Yeah.
He feels like more of a cash game play. He was a guy I kept looking at just because there haven't been many shortstops that I like in the late slate. We haven't really talked about very many outside of a couple value options. So he was a guy I was looking at in this lineup. I just don't really like... No one's really jumping out to me other than the ones we pointed out already. Is there anybody else that you really like in this one?
No, I mean, for me, it's going to be mostly Gonzalez and Puig.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fine total, not a great total. Brett Anderson is, like, he keeps the ball on the ground, like I said. So I'm not going out of my way to target him with a lot of Arizona bats because not a dominant guy, but he's effective. So, those kind of limits the big innings there. And if I'm going to be stacking, looking at GPPs, I want to have guys in lineup positioning that, against a pitcher that allows a lot of base runners because it's going to put you in a better position. I don't think that's the spot for Arizona.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, next up on tap here, we have Kansas City at the Los Angeles Angels. And we've got an interesting matchup here, Jason Vargas against Hector Santiago. And by interesting, I mean you can hit both of these guys, especially Santiago. Jason Vargas, a lefty, not a very good lefty. So, I mean, this is another theme here. It's the bottom of the barrel here with the starting pitchers. So this is definitely a game that you can target, and you can target pretty heavily as well. Looking at the total here, we got only a 7.5 run total, which was surprising to me. I know part of that due to the park factor. You've got it's more of a pitcher's park there in LA, but I don't mind some bats from this game either. I mean, on both
I like
sides,
Pujols quite a bit in this one actually. 4,200 on DraftKings is a pretty nice price at first base there. Obviously, Trout is the elite play here. I don't mind playing both of those guys back to back. like you said, you can kind of attack this game a little bit. The prices are pretty nice here, actually, for the most part on both sites. You can get a decent amount of guys in your lineup. Alex Rios is another guy I actually like. I don't love his price on DraftKings. It's a little too pricey for me. But I actually like Rios a little bit too.
Yeah, I don't mind him either. And assuming that he's batting higher in the order, Sal Perez, the guy that paid off nicely yesterday, despite being in that 7-hole. He was a nice contrarian play down there. I know you and I, a bunch of other people, not happy that he was in the 7-hole. I still played him. He's over his career, good against lefties. Not so great last year, but I'm going to go with, realizing that over the course of his career, he's been good against lefties and stick more with that and think that last year was more of an anomaly. And he's got a lot of power, sitting at $3,500 on FanDuel. His DraftKings price is a little bit higher at $3,800, but, I mean, a guy with upside there, you assume he's probably going to be batting at least top 6 in the order here, so I like him quite a bit against Santiago.
Yeah, we haven't really mentioned many catchers. That's the other thing, is there hasn't really been a ton. I mean, I like Lucroy again a little bit, but he's quite a bit more expensive on both sites, and I think Perez is a pretty decent value upside option.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. And elsewhere, we have not a lot of guys I'm going on my way to target here in this game. I mean, both guys beatable, but it's going to depend on lineup construction. We saw Mike Moustakas batting second against the lefty, which made no sense last time out for Kansas City. So I guess I'm going to kind of wait and see here with this lineup and see where people are slotted at before I go too crazy in this one.
Definitely.
All right, Seattle and Oakland the next one, and this brings up another interesting GPP pitcher. And actually both guys in play for me here.
Yeah.
6.5 run total, the lowest on the night by a lot over most of these games. Pretty much a pick 'em. Small favorite for Drew Pomeranz at home. Taijuan Walker, guy who last week was earning that last name, walked over 11% of batters, but much better in the spring. Didn't really have those problems in the minors, as Josh had pointed out in the other podcast we did. And he's got some nice strikeout upside here, so which is rare on tonight's slate. So really both these guys in play for me, and due to that fact, really know what I'm looking at outside of Ben Zobrist.
Yeah, no one really for me. I mean, I looked at Cano a little bit, but I don't really want to pay that price for this really low run total.
Yeah.
I think Zobrist is probably the only guy that I feel decent about. I mean, the second base eligibility is really the only thing putting him in play for me, even in this game. So outside of that, I think, like you said, the pitchers are both great GPP options. I actually don't mind either one of them for cash games either. So I'm going to be looking at the pitchers. I'm not going to be looking at the hitters in this one.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, 6.5 run total. You got 15 games today. There's not any reason to be playing a lot of hitters from this game. All right, next up, San Francisco at San Diego. Last game of the night. Tim Lincecum, his fall from grace has got him now as the 4 starter for San Francisco. He was in the bullpen for a little while. And not the upside that he once had, but he shows flashes at times. Brandon Morrow on the other side, another guy. Used to be a high strikeout guy, struggled with some injuries, hasn't really regained that form. Now pitching in San Diego, which is a perfect spot for him. And 6.5 run total here. So Vegas obviously likes Petco Park as a pitcher's park. And due to that, once again, we're going to end this one on a pretty easy note. I don't like a single hitter on either side in this one.
Yeah, I don't feel great about them, but I honestly like both of these guys as like deep GPP plays here because, I mean, like you said, we've both seen these guys have huge strikeout games, pitch really well. Obviously, neither one of them has been very good recently. But, I mean, even last year, Lincecum had a stretch where he was dominant for a couple games. And both of these guys still have that in them. I don't really love the prices here. I wish they were both like 1,000 less because then I'd be all over them in GPPs. But, I mean, there's some upside here. Like you said, it's really hard to like any of the hitters in this game at San Diego, facing pretty high strikeout total guys. I mean, there's just not a lot to love here.
Yeah, I mean, worst park for hitters, 2 above average pitchers. I'm staying away as well. All right, with that, that's going to wrap things up here for us today in the Chin Music GPP podcast. I'm at Big Italy 42. He is at sports_25 to life, and we will see you guys again next time.